J.K. Rowling is an interesting writer because despite being one of the most successful authors in the world, I haven't had any of the plots of her books spoilt for me since she moved away from Harry Potter. This is something I just don't care for. I personally prefer to enjoy my media in a very solitary way. I don't particularly want to read reviews before I watch something, and I always find it extremely sad to see people say they liked something until they read something negative about it and that changed their mind. Rowling's books have not been spoilt for me in a good while, and despite all the scrutiny she gets, I feel like most people just control F and search terms like cis, trans, cross-dressing, then briefly read a Wikipedia summary and type up their outrage. Hint people, read The Silkworm, that's the one to get angry at. Yeah, it's interesting. Troubled Blood, probably one of the lesser novels from her in my personal opinion. People got outraged about that, but they got the actual killer wrong, which, great, because, I read that thing, and even though I wasn't huge on it, at the very least, the actual killer at the end was a surprise. In my opinion, Rowling more or less deserves her success. It's always a bit awkward to say whether the most popular author in the world deserves their place, but I will say, whenever I've discussed Harry Potter and people present alternatives, I feel a bit like just going, oh, fuck off. I tend to dismiss them, and I think there's a reason. Look, don't take this as like a feminist stance or something. Most of what I enjoy is made by men, but there is something about male authors who work in fantasy. Bluntly, no child would have liked Harry Potter had it been written by a man. They'd have thrown it in the bin after the several pages devoted to explain how magical trains work. Don't get me started on the whole chapter debating the sentience of chocolate frogs. Yeah, there's a reason Rowling's popular, and she understands that lore is not actually good writing. Instead, a lot of the details of her world are more incorporated via humour, side jokes, that sort of thing. Once again, that makes discussion of her books pretty terrible because people are overanalyzing single throwaway lines, which were probably meant as a gag rather than a full-on discussion of how her works work. So what is The Ink Black Heart? Well, at its core, it's a detective story, which is most of Rowling's works, to be fair. And it's a detective story that delves into the culture war, which isn't the first one she's done on this subject. In the past, she's kind of touched on that in Lethal Right, but that was more of a dirtbag left versus Tory rights sort of novel. Ink Black Heart is very different because it's kind of going full in on the SJWs versus alt-right sort of media debacles we see. In this case, covering a children's work, and if you suspect Rowling might be using this as a chance to vent a bit about having made Harry Potter, well, I kind of suspect the same. The story doesn't line up as some exact parallel, and this is where a lot of the backlashes came in, but you definitely get the impression that certain experiences she may have had online and with certain fans has influenced this novel quite a bit. Of course, here's where I'm going to go controversial. I think the book's really, really good. It's easily one of the best things I've seen on this subject. I know a lot of people liked season 2 of The Boys, and I liked it okay. I feel it's a bit overrated. I feel Stormfront in particular feels like people were just very happy to see a show like called Nazis, which, to be fair, I can understand, but I think when discussing the alt-right as a whole, it's a bit of a simplistic stance to just make your avatar of like a Nazi in a modern setting. Ink Black Heart does a more interesting job. It's got a bit more ire for everyone also. I definitely see the spite in this when it comes to Rowling's own fan base. She's better at coming across as quite reasonable and polite in her podcasts. I read these books partly to see her go off a bit, and that's always entertaining to see this on the older side of middle-aged woman kind of rant at points. Seriously, one of my favourite bits of Troubled Blood was a whole bit where it's basically her just yelling about online pornography, which, I got a good laugh out of, I have to admit. So yeah, I also appreciate her lack of respect for the sort of people who would write hour-long video essays about the fascist subtext of various children's works. So good on you, Rowling. It's cool to see you give a middle finger to those people. I feel such interpretations are very much warranted. Most of the negative criticism I've seen from Ink Black Heart comes down to what I thought was one of the best aspects, which is how big chunks of the book are basically Twitter, and sometimes they're a website and sometimes they're an online chat. And this is great, partly because it gives a good way to really give the villain a lot of time on the page, something detective stories often have a problem with. It's really nice, really clever gimmick. I liked it a lot. If you're a bit squeamish, you probably haven't been reading Rowling's adult novels, but yeah, she goes full hardcore here. Expect lines like, if you get raped every time you say something dumb, you'll probably be permanently full of cock. Misspout, of course, because it's Twitter. But yeah, aside from blurring the N-word, which, I don't read it as blurred myself, Rowling goes pretty hardcore here, and it's nice to see it be pretty accurate to how people talk. That was always an issue I've taken with even stuff like Peacemaker or The Boys, where at a point you realise they probably aren't willing to go as hard as they really need to kind of show how online discussion can get. I feel like her portrayal of weird online fringes is pretty accurate, and it's interesting to see really obscure figures like Weave get referenced. Like I knew Weave when I was young. I didn't know Weave. You know what I mean. I knew of Weave. So she definitely knows who Christian is, because he's certainly a much more important online figure. Thankfully, Sam Hyde doesn't get a mention here. Please starve these people of attention. I would say confidently that this is Rowling's best villain. Once again, the online focus gives him a good amount of screen time, which is often sort of an issue, I feel, with her previous works. Rowling often tends to have more interesting side characters than protagonists, and I feel like Strike's a good example of that. Her Strike novels, I tend to find Strike and Robin the least interesting characters in them, and at points I almost want to flip through their drama and get to the next suspect, which I still feel here, but you actually do build up a pretty solid image of who the main villain is and sort of how they got to where they are. It's particularly interesting to reread it because certain twists will certainly make previous conversations feel very different when you know the full context. Yeah, like I said, I feel like the drama versus Troubled Blood is much more about the mystery and much less about the personal drama, which, I don't mind Strike and Robin, but I do at times wish she'd spend more time fleshing out her other characters. It's weird in a way. Like, with most stuff, I tend to feel, particularly with American TV dramas, that they need to have less characters and focus more on a few core protagonists. With Rowling, I increasingly feel like I want to see more of these other characters she's written about and less of the main characters. Just kind of see how they got from one place to another, particularly in this, because I ended up probably filling in a good few blanks with my own sort of imagination, since I have known a good few people who certainly remind me of certain characters in Ink Black Heart. So what can I say about Ink Black Heart? Well, I found it highly entertaining. I do enjoy the subject matter. And there is, I think, a certain irony in all these people who make their whole living off YouTube drama and cultural shit immediately jumping on this novel when it's bluntly far more entertaining and far more worthwhile, if you ask me, than anything they've ever shit out. So, yeah, is it a masterpiece? Not really. I feel Rowling is still too stuck with the traditional detective formula. The tweets, the message board posts, the website, all that stuff I love, and it makes me really wish she'd gone farther in this direction. Nevertheless, this is probably one of my favourite works on this type of topic, and the fact that this is an absolutely massive novel, and at the end my main issue was I wanted more of it, well, it's hard not to say that it comes highly recommended.